Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us once again in the Thought Adventure podcast today. We have a very special episode where we'll be talking to our guest here, Aron Ra, about whether a necessary being exists. Aron is an extremely well-known atheist. He's an activist. He's a podcaster. He has a YouTube channel where he discusses a lot of topics about religion, philosophy, atheism, science, and we're hoping this is going to be a good discussion. Good to have you here, Aron.
Thank you much.
And to the panelists, assalamu alaikum. How's it going?
Wa alaikum salam.
Now, Aron, maybe you can give us like a brief intro about yourself, what you do, your views, and then we can get right into it.
Well, I'm a secular advocate. I'm an activist advocating for science, secular science and education, and also secular policies in politics, which, of course, in the United States of late has been quite a challenge.
Cool. Okay, so this discussion is titled, Does a Necessary Being Exist? And of course, we know it's highly unlikely that, Aron's going to come out of this discussion believing in God, or that Jake, Sharif, or I will get convinced in the opposite direction. But in order for this discussion to be as intellectually fruitful as possible, we need to structure it in a way where we can lay out, our views on the table, define our terms, and try to understand our respective epistemic frameworks and deconstruct the opposing views from there, so that we can actually try to get somewhere. So I guess, that is a difficult goal to achieve. But if we go about it in the right way, and if we sort of address the right questions and the foundations of this discussion, keeping in mind that we are coming from different frameworks, different epistemic frameworks, different worldviews, we need to try to come to as much common ground as possible so that we can move forward with the discussion in an intellectually meaningful manner. So I guess we can start by asking Aron some questions, and I prepared some questions here so that I can try to achieve that goal. We can try to achieve that goal in the stream to the best of our ability. So I first want to ask Aron about his views. Is he a hard atheist, a soft atheist, agnostic, something else?
All right. Well, for the longest time, I was agnostic, in that I didn't have a belief in God, and I left open maybe the possibility, but now I understand that there's not even a possibility, literally. And so, and all we have is evidence that God has been made up. So my belief in God is now about the same as your belief in leprechauns. It's not just that they don't exist, but they can't exist.
Okay, and this, so you're defining yourself as a hard atheist, and this is generally with regard to the proposition for, if I give you a proposition, a necessary being exists. Are you saying that you are you believe that proposition is outright false?
Right. There's no such thing as a necessary being. The better question is is God really necessary? And I don't even think that's a valid question. There's no indication of God. There's no possibility of God. It's just something we made up to feel comfortable somehow.
Well, okay, since this discussion revolves around our knowledge of this specific proposition I'm putting forward here, let me ask you about your epistemology. So in your view, what are the acceptable methods out there that we possess as humans in order to come to know anything? Must it be observable? Can we infer things about the unobservable? What's your epistemology? How do you come to know things? That's going to help us know how you've come to know that this proposition is false.
Well, a lot of people will think that because they believe something is the same thing as knowing it. And that I call that the fourth foundational falsehood of creationism. You can't actually, if you can't demonstrate the accuracy of your claims to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, then you can't actually know what you merely believe. So you have to be able to show that there's some truth to it. And if you can't show that there's a truth to it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's false. It just means there's no truth you can show for it. And so you could leave open the possibility, if there is a possibility to consider, but don't allow yourself to be convinced by it. You have to show me that there's a there there.
Yeah, but I guess, Aron, my question was more along the lines of how do we come to the conclusion that something is real or not, provided we both think that we're approaching this from like an evidentialist. We have an evidentialist approach to this, that we believe we need to have reasons and we need to show that our beliefs are true. So what I'm asking you is, what is the epistemological framework you're committed to in, determining whether something is true or not?
What I just said. I mean, if you want to make a claim, okay, I don't care what you believe. All I care is why you believe it. So show me the facts and evidence that imply that indicate that is at least a possibility, and at least it should be a probability. So show me that.
But how can I show it to you when you're not giving me a means? So I agree with you in one sense that I need to show you, I need to provide you with evidence, or I need to show you that a certain belief that I have is more likely to be true than not. But then what I'm asking for is what you regard as evidence, what you regard as justifiable reasons to regard such a belief as true.
Okay, so you're asking for a definition of evidence. A
Yes,
body of objectively
basically
verifiable facts that are positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with one available position or hypothesis over any other.
How are you defining facts here?
I just said objectively verifiable data.
No, but you said objectively verifiable facts, but you didn't really
It's
define.
a bit redundant. It's a bit redundant because people don't understand. The reason I say that is because people don't understand that the word fact is already objectively verifiable data. So it's not a fact just because you say it's a fact. It's a fact when we can show that it's a fact.
Is the law of non-contradiction a fact?
I don't know if that qualifies as a fact. We put this together. We analyze the universe in properties of it, and we try to work out the laws of that universe. When we summarize by a mathematical equation or a summary statement what we think the properties of the universe are, we have gotten them wrong before. So it's our best estimation.
Yeah. So the statement something X cannot be both X and not X at the same time in the same way, that's not a fact about reality.
I would say that I'm certainly going to adhere to that. But if it's something that we worked out about the universe, again, it's up to human foibles. I'm going to say that to the extent of our knowledge, no, you can't be something and both not be that something.
Okay. So I mean, I guess because for you, I know you appreciate science, right? And you value science a lot, right? And the idea here is that science is based on certain logical frameworks and philosophical presuppositions. And the discussion about philosophical underpinnings, the discussion about what evidence is really a philosophical discussion. It's because you don't have any experiment to answer that question. You don't have any, you can't take me to a lab and show me under a microscope what evidence is. You need to define it first in order to regard whatever you're going to show me as evidence. Okay. So you need to have a certain epistemic framework prior to your scientific investigation in order to regard anything at all as evidence.
Okay.
So it's a philosophical exercise. So I guess what I'm asking, the reason I'm asking you what a fact is because we might disagree on that too. So you're saying an objectively verifiable fact, and I'm asking if you're
verifiable data.
A fact is objectively verifiable data. So the law of non-contradiction, for example, the laws of logic, mathematics, and the philosophical underpinnings of science, these are not facts.
We can take mathematics to be fact.
Okay, so your view
would you
about
take,
these...
really quickly, would you take the law of non-contradiction as a data point? Is that how we came to the conclusion, or how you came to the conclusion about the law of non-contradiction?
I'm not sure about the question.
So I'm saying this is that either we use certain logical axioms in order to interpret the data, which basically means it comes prior to the observation, or we're saying that the logical axioms or these logical principles come after our observation of the universe. So I'm saying the law of non-contradiction, which you agreed is generally what you accept.
Yeah,
Does it
but
come through
is it
data,
demonstrable? Is it
observation?
verifiable? My question about it being a fact is whether it's objectively verifiable. I would assume that, I'm happy to assume that it's true, but I don't know how we would verify that. I think we just have to assume that it's true.
So in essence, what you're saying is that you will only believe in something which is demonstrable from the point of view of empirically demonstrable. If it's not empirically demonstrable, then you can't justify it as a fact or an evidence.
I can believe that something is likely to be the case, because when I say I believe something, I think I mean something different than when a believer says that. If I say that I believe something, I mean that this is what I suspect to be true or closest to the truth, but that I don't know it is because I can't show that it is. Whereas a believer will simply say that you express their belief as knowledge and say that they know that it is because they believe that it is.
Yeah, I don't think either any of us here believes that, we should believe in something just because we claim we believe in it, and that's simply enough. I think the issue is this, is that when we seek to analyze this question about a necessary being, and obviously you hold on to the hard atheist position that there is definitely no necessary being, the question then becomes, okay, we've got this body.
Why would it be necessary?
What do you mean, why would it be necessary?
Why would it be necessary?
So do you know what a necessary being would be? What that refers to?
No, I'm asking you.
Okay, so necessary being means that which exists and couldn't be any other way. Yeah. So when we talk about a necessary being, we're saying that there's something that exists as a foundation to reality that has to be and couldn't be any other particular way, which is contrasted to something which we call a possible or contingent being. Are you aware of these terms?
Yeah, I've heard them before. They're just nonsense. Because
why would you say they're nonsense?
So badly for there to be this being that you're going to deem it necessary when it's clearly not, and not involved. Not only is it not necessary, but it's not relevant.
Do you understand what being means in this in the term necessary being?
I don't understand what you mean by it.
Well, how are you interpreting it in your own head? How are you interpreting this idea?
If I were to define a being, I would say something that exists and also has consciousness.
Right. So in philosophy, we normally, when we talk about being, we're talking about that which exists. So when we say necessary being or contingent being, we're talking about something that has to exist. Yeah, it doesn't give a particular ontology about consciousness or not. That's a separate discussion. But when we talk about contingent being, we're talking about something that possibly exists, or it could exist in another way. Is that clear? Because it's quite important, because if you say, well, necessary being doesn't exist, then you need to be able to understand what necessary means and also what being means in that context, regards to that. And also it goes back to the other discussion, which then becomes about evidence and proofs used to justify the existence for this necessary existence or necessary thing that must exist and cannot exist in any other way. Does that make sense? So the point that I was mentioning earlier is, if what we're saying, or what you're saying specifically, is that the only evidence that you see to justify your position is that which is demonstrable from an empirical point of view, then in essence you're saying anything that's outside of empiricism cannot be established or concluded, even to the least amount of doubt. We're not talking about being absolutist in our knowledge or being absolutely certain, but just simply saying that we have a set of data, we come to certain conclusions. Is that right then? So that basically evidence for you, fact, data that allows you to conclude is only that which is demonstrably on an empirical basis.
Well, I would put it another way. I mean, if you can't know something, then you can't know it. Yeah. So
the only way we can know something is through empiricism. That's what you're saying.
As I said before, if you can't verify the accuracy of your claims to any degree at all, by any means whatsoever, then there's no way to show what you know. There's no way to test your knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just ask a question, because we were talking about the law of non-contradiction earlier, and you seem to say that you affirmed it in the sense that that's how you use it to operate and to live by. But on the other hand, it seemed like you also said that we couldn't demonstrate that the law of non-contradiction is actually a true principle. So I'm wondering what, sort of the connection between those two things are, because if it can't be demonstrated, why are you at the same time taking it or believing in it? I guess you would say that you believe in it, but you don't know that it's true.
I'm happy to assume that it's true. I can say that I know it's true to the degree that we can't show that it's false. I mean, there's no way. How do you falsify that? You would have to show something that is both itself and not itself.
Yeah,
so we're not going to have that.
Yeah, but I mean, if
philosophical conversations are just completely lost on me. I mean, I'm waiting for the meat.
Okay, but
philosophical conversation, they just never show up.
Yeah. So, but the issue though is if you have falsifiability as a principle in order to, as you said, demonstrate something or in order to have knowledge of it, then even by your own admission of what you just said, we could never really have knowledge of the law of non-contradiction and knowing that it's true, because it can't be falsified.
I said we can't verify it as a fact. We can assume it as a fact, but how would you test that? And I'm happy to assume that it is a fact.
So
and I'm still looking for the relevance.
So then you think that we can assume that certain things are fact without having knowledge of them, and that's okay?
Don't we have knowledge of that?
Well, I thought you just said that we don't.
I said that when you define something as a fact because it's objectively verifiable, how do you objectively verify that something can be and both can't be what it is?
Right. So if the standard for
so we don't
knowledge,
use the word fact, well, we can still use the word knowledge because we have examples of things being what they are. We have no possibility of it not being what it is. So then when we don't have that, then we can establish, okay, yeah, then that has to be true.
Right. Well, that would be considered a necessary being or a necessary fact.
No, it wouldn't.
Yes, it would, because you just said it couldn't possibly be another way, which means that it's necessary.
I said there's no possibility of it.
Right, which means that it's necessary.
Which means that there's literally no possibility. Doesn't mean that it's necessary.
Yeah, I think you're saying the same thing. I think
in order to say whether something is possible, in order to say whether something is, well, you can't, in science, you can't say that something is. Like religion always, asserts facts that aren't facts and pretends to know things nobody can know, right? That's just, every religion does that. But science can't do that because that is effectively lying. When you say something is a fact, that's not a fact. When you say you know things no one can even know, those are both lies. But in order to say whether something is true, you have to have the evidence indicating that. You have to be able to immediately show that there is evidence indicating that. In order to say whether something is possible, you have to show a precedent or a parallel or verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. When you don't have that, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is not possible. It just means there is no possibility.
Okay, so Aron, you're saying that religion makes claims that you couldn't possibly verify, and you don't have evidence for. First of all, I want to say, you said you want to get to the meat of it, right? And this is the problem, that we are coming from different angles, and we have different epistemic commitments, and what we want to do is come to a certain common ground. In order for the conversation to move forward, we need to agree what it means for evidence to be, and what it means for verification to be, and fact to be, and all of these things. Because a lot of times these discussions just go on for hours of people talking past each other, using these terms differently, or not even understanding what they are whatsoever. I mean, there's a lot of philosophical literature out there about this, and it's not like any of this is non-controversial. But you said that religion asserts things without evidence. So you asserted a while ago that it is not a possibility that a necessary being exists. I'm wondering what your evidence is for that. There is no possibility that a necessary being exists. That's a positive statement. I was wondering what your evidence is for that. So what's the objectively verifiable fact that points you to this proposition that a necessary being cannot exist?
Once again, I repeat, in order to say whether something is possible, You have to show that there is a precedent or parallel or verified phenomenon indicating that such possibility exists. No one has ever presented one. You're welcome to prove me wrong by presenting that possibility. But if you don't present that possibility, then you're going to have to concede there is no possibility to present.
But the problem right now, Aron, is that you're making a positive ontological claim about reality by saying that in order to say that something is possible, we have to show that it is possible through objectively verifiable facts.
I said there's no possibility.
Yeah, but the problem is you yourself right now are making a claim about reality, and you're not holding yourself by the same standard.
I am definitely holding myself by the same standard. I'm saying that believers have not presented any such possibility. You are welcome to do so, but until someone does, my statement remains true. No one has ever produced a possibility that God exists.
So if no one ever, let's for the sake of argument for a second, because I disagree, obviously, but okay. If no one ever produced a possibility, if no one ever producing a possibility that God exists entails that it is not possible that God exists, if that's your view, if that's your view,
that would not assume that. In fact, I corrected earlier. I said exactly the opposite. I said that just because you don't have a possibility doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means there's literally no possibility to discuss.
Oh, okay. So you're not a hard atheist in the sense that you say a necessary being does not exist. You're just saying
I'm
that
a hard atheist.
So you're more of an agnostic.
No, I'm a hard atheist in the sense that I know that God does not exist in the same way, for the same reasons, and to the same degree that I know that leprechauns don't exist.
But yeah, what's your basis for that? So, for example, when we talk about leprechauns, so philosophers talk about there's the famous saying, evidence of absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and that of course needs to be qualified. So philosophers normally say that they speak about this, and they say that evidence of absence is absence of evidence is evidence of absence in a situation where the being that you're positing would actually you would actually expect for it to leave evidence that you did not find when you're investigating it. So if you posit that a leprechaun exists, or if you say that like Bigfoot exists or whatever, we should expect a certain type of evidence that we can verify, through which we can verify the existence of such a being. But right now you're saying, right now I don't believe that leprechauns exist because I expect a certain set of data or evidence. If it were to exist, I would expect that kind of evidence that would verify its existence. Now, in the case of the existence of God, what is that evidence that you haven't found that makes you come to the same conclusion that we do about leprechauns?
Okay, those are different topics. First of all, you would expect to find evidence of Bigfoot, and we would have found it by now if there was such a thing. And leprechauns, on the other hand, are entirely supernatural. Like God, they are entirely supernatural. They leave no trace of themselves, even when they supposedly do something. So people will attribute everything that happens to God, even when there's a natural explanation for it. They don't care. They know that there's a natural explanation, and they'll just pretend that God orchestrated that natural explanation. So natural explanations still become explanations of God. And then they'll pretend things.
Yeah, but that's sorry, Aron. That's precisely the point. So Bigfoot, there would be evidence. We don't have the evidence. Bigfoot doesn't exist. Leprechauns wouldn't leave evidence behind. Therefore, what a lot of people say is that in this case, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, because there is no predicted set of there's not a predicted set of data that you would expect as evidence were a leprechaun to exist. So right now I'm saying, what is this evidence that you would expect to exist if God existed, and basically that we don't have access to, so that justifies you in concluding that God does not exist?
Again, referring to leprechauns, you're looking for a way to disprove leprechauns, and the point that you're missing is that there's no reason to believe leprechauns.
That's two separate issues, though. There's two separate issues, Aaron. One is...
You need to have a reason to believe something.
Yeah, that's right. You need to have a reason to believe something. That's one thing. The second thing is having an understanding that something is impossible. Those are two separate issues.
Okay.
Now, what Abdul is explaining, he's saying that, look, if you just have an absence of evidence of X, it doesn't mean that X doesn't exist. So if I turn around and I say X does not exist, it means that I'm making a positive claim. Now, what Abdul said, he said that to make that positive claim that X does not exist, one of the ways would be to say, well, if X existed, I would see this evidence. If this evidence doesn't exist, therefore that justifies me saying that X does not exist. So he's asking the same question because you're in a position where you've made a hard atheist claim that God does not exist.
What was my hard atheist claim?
So the hard atheism, that God does not exist. That is your position. Not that I don't believe in God because of the lack of evidence. A soft atheist claim, but it's a hard atheist claim. So what Abdul is asking is a very specific question. He's saying, look, if you're making this claim that God does not exist, X does not exist, you have to either demonstrate that if God existed or X existed, we would see this evidence. Because we don't see this evidence, then I can discount God. Yeah. So you have to explain what Abdul's specific question was. You have to explain what that evidence is that we would expect, such that it doesn't exist, leading us to the conclusion that God doesn't exist.
I feel like repeating myself an awful lot. You're asking questions I've already answered, but we don't have a possibility. We start with that. And it's not just that we don't have a possibility. It's just that things are defined in reverse. I mean, you want to imagine that somehow the mind exists outside of the brain. There's no support for mind-body dualism whatsoever. But you're assuming that consciousness pre-exists matter, and there's no logical conclusion that would lead to any of the gods that men have ever devised. When you look at the entirety of the cosmos, there's just no way to conclude that this thing cares that much about the skin on the tip of our penis if it created 11 jillion galaxies and so forth. There's not a possibility for him to how does he control whether your team wins the game or whether you find your keys? How does he manipulate matter? And believers will commonly tell me that that God helped them in matters like this. But in that case, God had to manipulate other people's minds, control other people's free will in order to, manipulate everything to these ends. And they're just not thinking this through. So what I need is we need to show that there's a there, or we literally have nothing to talk about.
Yeah. So this, again, like I said, there's two issues. One issue is to make a positive claim that God does not exist. That's one issue. Which means that we're saying it's logically impossible for God to exist. The second claim is, do we have justifications and reasons? Yeah. So do we have justifications, reasons to believe something? Yeah. So there's two separate issues. And what we're saying is that you're talking about is this first point, which is you're basically saying that it's logically impossible for X to exist. Some of the arguments that you used was just simply to say that, well, if God exists, there needs to be consciousness, and for consciousness to exist, there needs to be a body to exist. Am I understanding your particular?
By definition of what a mind is, yeah. I mean, a mind is the product of biology. So if there's no biology, how can you have a mind?
Okay. Is that a conclusion that you come through an inductive process, or is that a conclusion that is deductive?
That's by definition. That's what I understand the mind to be. So you have to redefine what a mind is if you want to have a disembodied consciousness. It requires a redefinition of mind, to my understanding.
Yeah. So nobody.
Can I ask
when we talk about the issue of the mind, nobody turns around and says mind by definition needs a brain or is a brain. Yeah. That is where you put the predicate within the subject. Nobody puts the predicate within the subject to say that it has to be this way.
Nobody meaning me, and a lot of other people who actually do that. Yeah.
Because it's like, for example, look, it's as an example. Yeah. If I turn around and I say an unmarried bachelor. Yeah. Well, that's where you put the predicate within the subject. Yeah. So you're basically saying the same thing. Yeah. When you say
You're saying
mind,
that nobody.
you're saying when you
nobody
reduce.
does what I do and that other people do. Nobody does what we do.
No, I'm saying you're saying by definition. You're saying by definition. I'm saying it's not by definition that you can say that the mind is reduced to the brain. That wouldn't be the correct way to say that.
You could say, I said that you have to redefine mind. So now you're going to redefine mind for me.
No, I'm saying no, because it comes down to the issue of how we understand this term by definition. When we say when we say by definition, what we're saying is that literally in the definition of the word, we can come to this conclusion. And I'm saying that you don't have to, it's not even the definition of the word brain that you come to the conclusion of a mind. Yeah, that would be false.
In the reverse,
that would be,
it should be
a fallacious link between the two, because you'd have to have a further justification that a brain causes or produces the mind. So it's not by definition in that sense. That's why we have experiments. That's why we have neuroscientists, because they have to investigate this, as opposed to just simply saying we can just define it by the mind. For example, by definition, a triangle has 3 sides. I don't need to investigate. I don't need to empirically study this. I can come to that conclusion just by the definition of the word. Yeah. So I'm just saying it's false to argue that by definition, brain equals mind or mind equals brain, because
I did not say that mind equals brain. I said that mind is a product of biology. So in the definition, just look up common definition, the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences, to think and to feel, the faculties of consciousness and thought. So yes, in the definition, right there in the definition, it is a product of biology.
Where? Which part?
I said that that's by definition, and it is by definition. You can verify it, and that you were going to have to redefine mind to take it otherwise. And now you are going to redefine mind for me because I was right.
Aron, which part of that definition do you think that it necessitates it being a product of biology?
The element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and of their experiences. So yes, it's pulling on the senses and says that it is a person to think and to feel, and what part of the body thinks, so what part of the body feels.
So you're assuming that a person is a biological structure.
What else is it?
It's not biological.
I think every person that's ever existed has been biological.
See, the part of the issue here is, I think you're using sort of common sense, maybe understandings or definitions, but in terms of philosophy, they don't have the definitions that you're implying. If you look up personhood in philosophy, it doesn't necessitate a biological structure.
Okay. But that's when we're talking about personhood. We were talking about the definition of mind.
Well, but you said person necessitates a biological structure. It doesn't.
Okay. Are we going to argue the definition of definition next? Because with some philosophers, I've actually had that come up. I was arguing with a professor of philosophy at a seminary school where we actually did have to bring up the definition of definition. Because when the same conversation that we're having now, when it comes to evidence, he told me that evidence is not evident because facts are not factual, because nothing can ever be objectively verified, because everything is imaginary and everybody's reality is whatever they want it to be, which is why I find philosophy so utterly empty.
I don't think we're trying to do that.
Aron, with respect, I think the problem here is that you're not very concerned with the philosophy, and when you said you want to get into the meat of it, you basically want us to talk about like empirical evidence for God or something. But it seems like it seems why
you believe what you believe. That's
yes, but in order to do that,
believe it, because you're never going to come up with that. I need a reason. You don't have one.
Yeah,
so
but
I want to know why you believe.
I get that, Aron. But then, in order for me to understand why you don't believe, I need to break your epistemology down and understand what, in your view, qualifies something to be a justified belief and what doesn't. And in the same way, you're going to need to understand my point of view. But it seems that here you're really unconcerned. You're undermining the value of philosophy, and it seems like that's why.
No, I believe there is a value of philosophy. It's just wholly misused in religion.
But when you say that mind is by definition a product of brain, then you're just you're skipping over a whole bunch of philosophy. That's like in the philosophy of mind, these discussions are huge, and the literature out there is expansive. So when you say that it is by definition a particular theory of mind, so you choose a particular theory of mind that is not in any way uncontroversial, and you say that this particular theory is by definition what we're going to link the term mind to, that's very philosophically unsophisticated, if I can put it like that. Okay. Because there are a lot of other theories of mind out there that can preclude the idea of a brain existing, or at least they don't necessitate the reliance on a physical structure. So the problem here is that you want to skip over a whole bunch of philosophy. You want to bring your materialistic presuppositions to the table, and you want us to provide you with evidence based on your presuppositions without us questioning them whatsoever. And I think that's kind of contradictory with the idea of you being a skeptic. I mean, you should be skeptical about your views, right? We should question everything. We should be reasonable about our views. And I think with what you've presented here so far, you shouldn't be very confident about your views, because these views should form the foundation of your atheistic belief and the foundation of your rejection of God. And to be honest, to be quite frank with you, if the foundation of your rejection of the idea of a necessary being is this flimsy, then honestly, I really don't know how far we can go in terms of providing you with evidence, because it doesn't seem like you're going to accept any kind of leeway in terms of how we're going to move forward with this.
I'm going to have to jump in. I'm sorry. I've been really trying not to interrupt. But when absolutely every single thing you say and your assumptions about my position and the things that you think that I said when I said the opposite, when everything you say about what I've said is wrong, absolutely every assumption you've made has been wrong and already corrected before you made the assumption, I don't know what to do with it. How do I let you jump to all of the wrongest conclusions you can imagine when I've already corrected them and you assume the opposite anyway? I don't know what to do with that. I'm sorry.
Can you tell me what I misrepresented you in? Because I don't want to misrepresent you.
I want to do something that I don't want to do. I should interrupt and tell you, no, I don't want to do that.
So I apologize. I apologize if I misrepresented you, but if you could just explain what I misrepresented your views on, and I'll be happy to retract it.
Okay, well, I wasn't taking rapid notes about when you said that I want to do the thing that I don't want to do. I don't remember what everything was that you were telling me that I was. All of the assumptions that you were making, no, there was too many too fast. And
the gist of my point, the gist of my point was that you're bringing materialistic presuppositions to the table that you don't want to be skeptical of.
Materialistic presuppositions.
Yeah, you're coming forward with a materialistic theory of mind, and you're saying that mind is by definition this theory of mind.
I was taking a common definition of mind. Yes.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. You don't believe in magic, do you?
That's the problem. Yeah, I don't. Okay. If there was a thing like magic, then at least we would have something to base a god on, because gods are made of magic. So in order for a god to exist, we have to have some magic, right?
So how do you define magic?
The supernatural.
Okay,
supernatural
what do you mean?
miracles. Miracles and magic have the same definition.
So so we're saying, okay, magic doesn't exist. I agree with you, magic doesn't exist. Now you're saying magic is supernatural. Let's take, for example, you got a naturalistic being, a human being, and he whips out a rabbit out of a hat. Yeah, is that magic? Would that be false?
There's a saying among the skeptics that real magic is false and fake magic is real.
Right, so it's fake. So what he's doing is fake.
Pulling the rabbit out of the hat, that's the fake magic. That's the one that's real. But the real magic is false.
Okay, so in terms of the person who's pulling out the rabbit from the hat, and you're saying it's not magic. The reason why it's not magic is because there's a naturalistic explanation, a materialistic explanation. Yeah. So you're saying, in essence, that magic would be that which doesn't have an explanation for it.
The way I like to illustrate this is, if there was a supernatural, then there would be, at some point in history, people like Hermione and Gandalf and Obi-Wan and Spock who would be able to demonstrate those powers reliably, repeatedly. And it would be such that even if science could not explain them, there would at least be a there. We can show that Gandalf really can do this thing, and Hermione really can do this thing with her wand, and we see that these things happen, and they really do happen. in which case, faith healers would be working in hospitals and that sort of thing, and prophets would be correct sometimes.
No, I understand what you're saying, Aaron, but what I'm trying to understand is how you define magic. How do we define this particular magic? Because I think it goes to the heart of epistemology. How do we understand what we know? So what you're saying is that magic doesn't exist because if you have an event that doesn't have an explanation, at least as a non-materialist explanation, that would be something that's quote unquote magical and therefore something that wouldn't exist. Is that how you're understanding it? It's not just the fact that it breaks the laws, the known laws of nature. It's the fact that it has no laws to govern its coming into being.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I mean, the concise definition would be that magic and miracles, miraculous magic, magical miracles, whatever they're the evocation of supernatural forces or entities to control or forecast natural events in ways that are inexplicable by science because they defy the laws of physics, making them physically impossible.
Okay,
but if there was magic, then you could use magic to make things happen, and we'd be able to verify when somebody used magic to make something happen. There'd be repeated demonstrations and that sort of thing. There's a way to show that there's actually a truth there, even if we can't explain it, even if there's no scientific explanation possible for that.
Yeah,
because
but what I'm saying.
Thing.
So let me give you an example of this. In the stars in galaxies, the ones that are on the edges of galaxies, they orbit at the same speed or faster than the stars that are closer to the central mass, the supermassive black hole. Yeah. Now, according to the theory of gravity, that completely contradicts that theory of gravity because the stars on the edges of galaxies should be slower. If it's not slower, if it's going at the same speed as the stars towards the closer to the central mass of the galaxy, they would break its orbit. Yeah. So that's something that breaks.
Not an orbit.
What's that?
That's not an orbit. I've seen the models of galaxy movement, and it's not that way. And it's not an issue of their orbits. They don't orbit it. I mean, when everything is rotating together, it's not an orbit.
Okay, they're moving, they're rotating together. Yeah. But the ones at the edge of the
violation
universe
against gravity there. And even if there was, but there's not.
No. So there's two things, isn't it? There's two things. They've made these observations. So there's two things that they could use. And this is what I'm trying to say about the issue of magic. Yeah, why we don't appeal to it. The first way to interpret the data is to turn around and say that our whole theory of gravity is completely wrong. We need to rechange it, in order to incorporate this new observation. That's one way to solve the problem. The second way to solve the problem is to posit a form of matter that exists that exhibits gravity, but we just can't see it. Dark matter. And that's pretty much where the current science is. So what they're doing is
Fortunately not. Right now, and this is recent, so that's why you wouldn't know about it. It was just days ago that somebody's just got $100,000 grant to pursue a physical theory that replaces dark matter, or the need for dark matter, with and I'm not into physics, so I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's a subatomic particle that instead of being massless is now taken to have a small amount of mass and can somehow account for the former necessity of dark matter.
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter in terms of the particular explanation or theory or model that they propose to explain this. What I'm trying to show is that when it comes to our observations as human beings, what we do is we think that the universe operates according to comprehensibility, something that's comprehensible. And so if we see an event, we seek an explanation behind the event. If we don't have an explanation behind the event, we call it magical, and therefore we dismiss it because we dismiss magic. I.e., there has to be an explanation behind things that we observe within the universe. This is what I'm saying. So I'm saying I agree with you, Aaron, in terms of saying that magic doesn't exist and that if we see some sort of event within the universe, we look for an underlying explanation for it. Yeah. So I agree with you on that. So, and I agree with you that we cannot therefore come to a conclusion about something that exists, some event that has no underlying explanation for its existence within the universe. Yeah. This would be something that we'd dismiss out of hand. So, for example, if the magician literally gets a rabbit out of the hat with no explanation, we dismiss it. Yeah, we in fact, we wouldn't say literally it's taking it out of the hat. We just simply say, no, there is an explanation. It's just that maybe we don't know what the explanation is. Yeah. So we look for explanation behind things.
So we can call something unexplained. And when scientists call something unexplained, the believers say, translate that as explained by God.
No, we're not saying anything which is explained by God, nothing like that. But what I'm trying to show is we don't just use observations. Rather, we have logical axioms, yeah, in order to understand and interpret those observations. So whether it is dark matter or this new fundamental theory of particle physics that explains why the orbits of the rotations of stars around galaxies, the speed that they're at, whatever it is, what we're saying is that on the fundamental layer of these observations is an explanation that causes it to be the way it is. And therefore, as human beings or scientists, we try to seek out an underlying explanation. So I'm saying is that you have observations here, you have logical axioms as well, and you bring them both together in order to interpret the data. So in this situation, this example, what you're using is something called the principle of sufficient reason. Yeah, you're looking at reasons behind our observations as a presupposition or an axiom or logical axiom to interpret data. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you agree upon that, then the next question becomes, okay, it's not just scientific data that we're looking at. Yeah, it's not just empiricism. There's something that's more fundamental than empiricism. There are logical axioms, which is where we get into philosophy now. Yeah. So there's philosophy out there. And this is one of those logical axioms is this thing called the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason, which states that any observations that we have within this universe requires an explanation for why it is the way it is. So the question then becomes is, what is it that we seek an explanation in? Yeah. Why do we seek that explanation? For example, if I had a red triangle, I would seek an explanation of why it's red, but I wouldn't seek an explanation as to why it's got three sides. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. So in the definition of a triangle, it has to have three sides. But in the definition of a triangle, it doesn't have to be red.
An object can be triangular, in which case I'm going to want to know why that thing has three sides.
No, I think Sharif is talking about stuff that are analytically true in the sense that something is true by definition. So if a triangle is by definition has three sides, then you're not going to seek an explanation for why a triangle has three sides. I mean, it's just the explanation is within the definition, right? It's analytically true.
Yeah, in this last 8 minutes now, I'd love to hear why you guys believe, because nothing you have spoken about so far is the reason you believe. And you'll know.
Well, so
tell me what makes you believe? Why would you want to?
Yeah. So first thing that we've established is that you can't be really a hard atheist.
No, we have not established that.
The second thing that I think we've also established is that it's not just empiricism that's sufficient for us to come to certain conclusions. We also need logical axioms and principles.
First thing. So the first thing you've actually established, because the first thing you said you established, you hadn't established.
Okay, but at least you accept that you need logical axioms. You need philosophy. The reliability of the data is only going to be reliable based upon the logical axioms that you have. Like, for example, the principle of sufficient reason.
I don't deny that philosophy has value. It does. And I wish that philosophy was taught in high school, though you would really want to control how that is taught because it is so grossly misused by religious apologists.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we've established. The second thing that I think is important to establish as well is this idea, or the third thing, if you want to say, or second thing, the principle of sufficient reason, that things that we observe within the universe have an explanation for why they exist, because we dismiss this idea of magic. Yeah, so we dismiss, for example, if I turn around and I say something that begins to exist has no cause for its beginning, we dismiss that because that violates the principle of sufficient reasoning, and that then starts to adhere to this idea of magic, which we said we disagree with, which I agree with you on that. So the next point, I think, and this is where the argument's building up, the next point is, on what basis do we apply the principle of sufficient reasoning? And I'm saying, when we look at things which are possible in a possible state, yeah, but they're actualized. So let's say there's an actualized possibility. As an example, you have a red triangle. It could have been a green triangle. It could have been a blue triangle, yeah? Because it's red in particular, I'm going to ask the question, why is it red as opposed to any other color? I'm not going to ask the question, why has it got three sides? Because that's, as Abdul said, it's an analytic proposition. It is where the predicate is contained within the subject, yeah, meaning its definition is, it's by definition three sides. But it's not by definition that it has to be red. So that's where I'm going to look for an explanation, and that explanation is going to be outside of the triangle or the existence of a triangle. Do you agree? And that's how science generally works. Science looks at things which are possible existences that exist, and it tries to understand why, using this principle of sufficient reason, why it exists, and it looks for an explanation outside of the thing itself.
Can we agree that what I get from many apologists is the excuse that anything is possible? And I know of many things, and I could list many things that are not possible. So can we agree that we cannot say that anything is possible?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, good.
So what I would do is
you said, and you agree with what I said. So there we go.
Yeah. So what I would do is I would list propositions into three general categories. Yeah. One is called logical necessity. Second one is logical possibility, and the third one is a logical impossibility. Yeah. A squared circle would be a logical impossibility. Yeah. A logical possibility is what we do in science. We look for things which are logically possible, and we investigate the way that they are and why they're the way that they are. Yeah. So when we look at an observation within the universe, and we're saying, well, it requires an explanation, the explanation is not contained within itself, it's rather contained outside of itself. Yes, then we're looking for the explanation other than the thing itself. Yeah. Now, this is going to lead to certain consequences. So one of those consequences is if the explanation itself for this contingent being, so a contingent being basically means something that's possible, is another contingent being, then we need an explanation for that. And then you fall into a potential infinite regress. Do you affirm an infinite regress? Because I say that's a logical impossibility.
I don't know. I'm trying to think, because what very often comes up is arguments of cosmology, which is another topic that I don't even discuss. I don't have any serious objections to it, other than I don't think that it's well thought out or well analyzed. Well, maybe it is well thought out given the data that we have, but we don't have a whole lot of data about it. And what we're talking about is what we've learned in the last century, and most of what we've learned only in the last half of that.
I
think of it this way.
I understand what you're saying, Aaron, but the issue is this, is that it's not about the particular model. Like, for example, the rotation of stars in galaxies. It's not about whether we have to change the theory of gravity, whether it's dark matter, whether it's this new particle that's in existence that explains why it is. What we're doing is we're seeing an observation. We're saying there is an explanation. There is an explanation, for it. Now, what that particular explanation is, we'd have to investigate further. But what I'm saying is that if we accept that as a principle, then if we're saying these things which are possibilities, i.e. contingent beings, require an explanation. Now, either the explanation is going to be upon another thing which is contingent, which then requires another explanation, or it's going to be upon an explanation that's founded upon something that's necessary, which means that it doesn't require any further explanation than its own existence, like a three-sided triangle. You don't ask the question why it's three sides.
All right, you've got 2 minutes left, and I apologize that we haven't gone anywhere with this at all.
I mean, Aaron, what are you saying? You're leaving?
It's been an hour.
Oh, okay. We weren't aware that we're limited to an hour, but I mean, I think we're getting somewhere. So So it's sad that you have to leave. Maybe you can consider staying. I think the gist of what Sharif is saying, after you've committed to a principle of sufficient reason, you've accepted that everything has an explanation, and Sharif explained what contingent things are and how they have explanations external to themselves. You also accept logic. So a logical entailment of that is everything in existence. Everything that is contingent in existence has some explanation beyond it, and that explanation that is beyond it, by definition and by logical entailment, can't be contingent itself, because it's already an explanation of all contingent things. And by that, using logic, reason, and even empirical reality, because we observe contingent things, we've established the existence of a necessary being. Now, what do you have to say about that?
I like how philosophers try to define their God into existence.
But Aron, you agreed with every step that leads to the conclusion that I've just provided. You agreed with the use of logic. You agreed that everything has an explanation, and you committed to a PSR, and you definitely a principle of sufficient reason that every contingent thing has an explanation. So you agree with every step of the chain, but then you throw the whole chain out altogether once it's done and said.
When you get up to the point where you're supposed to provide that sufficient reason, and then you don't, you simply jump to your conclusion without warning.
Okay, so tell me where the problem is. There are contingent things in the world. You accepted that contingent things require explanations external to themselves. I even saw one of the definitions you put on your website kind of indicates that you commit to a sort of principle of sufficient reason. And when we take everything that exists that is contingent, the set of all existent things that is contingent, whether it is finite or infinite, doesn't matter. So the set of contingent things that has an explanation beyond it. So if we can conclude that the set of contingent things is contingent, of course, we can argue for that. But if that is assumed and it has an explanation external to itself. Sorry,
you threw all of that out and jumped to Magic Invisible Man.
No, see what we're discussing right now, Aron. I don't want you to change definitions here. The reason we've made this discussion about a necessary being is because it kind of streamlines the discussion. We're not concerned with all the other properties. We can have a different stream where we discuss the other properties that we say God has. But in order to get somewhere, we have to kind of streamline the discussion and not keep jumping around to different places when we actually make some progress. So right now, everything in existence that is contingent, by your admission and by your concession, requires an explanation external to itself, because you've already said that everything requires an explanation. So if we can establish that a multiplicity of contingent things doesn't make it necessary, like, for example, my laptop requires an explanation, 100 laptops requires an explanation, an infinite number of laptops also requires an explanation, and we take the set of all contingent things in existence and we say that it requires an explanation external to itself, by definition, that explanation cannot be contingent, because we've already said that it explains all contingent things. Then we've established...
Somehow out of that, you jumped to God.
It jumped to a necessary being.
Right now, we're talking about a necessary being.
Hold on a second. We didn't get there yet, Aron. We're just trying to figure out if we even agree on there being a necessary being, and then we could.
There's lots we could.
Okay.
Talk.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, if we come to an agreement that there's a necessary being, doesn't necessitate that it's God, but then, as you said, maybe in the future
there's a necessary being.
What's that?
Much less that it's God. So we have to get to that first assumption, which we haven't gotten to, and then that it is God, which we're not going to get to.
Okay, but Aron, can you explain which part?
Hold on, Abdul, please. So what I'm saying, Aron, is that we were trying to build an argument for the necessary being. You agreed to the principle of sufficient reason, so we're on the same page there. Then what we're trying to explain is we have all these different things that we experience in reality that are contingent, that require an explanation for them outside of themselves. And so the question is, do we get to a bedrock thing that is necessary, that explains all these other contingent facts, or do we just keep going on ad infinitum with all these different contingent beings? The only two really possible options at this point is to say, well, there has to be some sort of necessary being that is the grounds and explains all these other contingent facts, or we just keep adding on more and more contingent facts ad infinitum, and we don't really get anywhere.
Or
so
matter and energy are eternal, never created, and then we don't have this problem at all.
But then you would say that matter and energy in that case would be necessary, and then you have a necessary being. It just happens to be matter and energy, right?
The reason being that it's not possible for there to be absolutely nothing.
Well, but I'm saying even in that equation, if you rejected an infinite regress and you said, well, the thing that's eternal is this matter and energy. Well, the question is that matter and energy that's eternal, is it necessary or is it a contingent fact? If you say that it's contingent, then it needs an explanation outside of itself. Or if you say that it's necessary, then you agree with us that there is something that is necessary. You just think that it's matter and energy. And then we could have a discussion about that.
Okay.
So, I mean, which one of those options would you, at this point, would you go with? Would you say that you think matter and energy is eternal but doesn't have to be necessary, and then we still have to figure out, well, what
if it was
explains
necessary,
that
the only thing that makes it necessary is that it's not possible for there to be absolutely nothing. At least I don't think it's possible for there to be absolutely nothing, and that impossibility would make the existence of something necessary. And
right. Okay.
None of it is relevant to what we're talking about.
No, it is because we're using, as we described in the beginning, what being was. We're not restricting it to this sort of God with consciousness and all that stuff. We're not adding that baggage into the equation.
We should.
But,
we could have another conversation about that.
We could. But before you go, I want to be clear on where we're leaving off. At this point, to me, it seems like you're agreeing that there is something necessary by the fact that you're saying you don't think that there could ever be absolutely nothing. And if that thing that is necessary is something like matter and energy or some configuration of it, then that, in terms of philosophy, would be a necessary being in that respect. We would disagree with that, but at least we would agree that there is something that is necessary, and then we could have a further discussion about which model best describes what should actually be considered necessary and what shouldn't.
Again, I don't deal with physics at all, and I know that Sean Carroll, although I would have said that it's impossible for there to be nothing, I know that Sean Carroll said that it is conceptually possible for there to be absolutely nothing. And so with that being the case, that means that matter and energy, if never created, are not necessarily necessary. So,
but you would disagree with Sean, though, right?
But we agree upon that.
Yeah,
we would agree that. Sorry, Jake, really quick. We would agree that conceptually nothing is not impossible. So we agree logically. That's basically, we're saying it's logically possible for there to be nothing. It's only logically possible for there to be something. So we agree upon that. What Jake was saying is that, look, what we're coming to the conclusion is this, is that you've got contingent being here. Contingent being requires an explanation. Either it has another explanation, which is another contingent being ad infinitum in a series of contingent beings and a chain that goes back forever, or there's a necessary foundation, a necessary thing within reality. Now,
and the necessary thing could be the eternity itself.
We agree with you, and that's what we're
negates the whole argument.
We're agreeing with you, Aron. Right now, we're just trying to decide if there's anything necessary in reality or everything is contingent. If we could get to a point where we agree that something has to be necessary, even if we don't know what it is, then we could have a further discussion about what the necessary being would be in terms of examining its and things like that. But we can't skip the step, because if we don't even agree that there's a necessary being, then it makes no sense to skip that step trying to go through this process.
Okay. So if you want to have another discussion, I mean, I could be open to that, but I certainly don't want to delve into this because I don't see where it goes anywhere and it's pointless. There are a lot of other things we could talk about. So pitch concepts to me and maybe I can come back.
Well, we made progress here, Aron. I think this was fruitful because at least we answered the question. Like, I mean, this normally doesn't happen. So the title of the stream is, does a necessary being exist?
And the answer was no.
Well, I didn't.
I think
I
all
thought
four
you-
of I think
I
it's
don't
clear
think
from the
you were
discussion
given
that
a
all
hard
four of
no.
us here agreed that
That
a necessary
the
being
answer is
exists.
no, that there is no necessary being.
There is
So you
something
don't think?
necessary.
Wait,
There is
Being
wait,
here
nothing
is
Arn.
necessary. That's what we
Arn.
agree on. There's nothing
Oh.
necessary.
No, but Arn, do you think that it's possible that matter and energy could be that necessary thing?
Could be. Is it
Yeah.
possible that it could be necessary?
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
possible that it could be necessary. It's also possible that it could not be necessary. And therefore,
Okay.
it's not necessarily necessary. So
Okay, but that's
nowhere
why
with
I'm asking you.
nothing. The answer to the question is no, there is not a necessary being, and I'm now 10 minutes over time.
Okay, so you
Okay,
don't
sorry.
think that. Okay, all right. I mean, I'd be happy to have you back on because
Yeah, but
I
when
think
if I come back on, I want to know why y'all believe what you believe. Not
Well, we're
Sure, but
explaining.
this is
But
this
this
is
is
the
this is what we're
process.
explaining.
This
The
is
real
part of the
reason.
process. This is part of the
We're
process, Aaron,
You
and
are
we want to have
Muslim
you on for
children,
longer.
right?
We're explaining to you why we believe in certain things. So one of the reasons why we believe is because we believe in the principle of sufficient reason, not magic. Yeah.
There's
One
no
of the
way that you can get to Islam through this.
one of the
Oh,
ways.
there is.
One of the other
Definitely
ways.
not.
One of the things. One of the other reasons
And this
why
is
we
not
believe
how
in
you got there.
why
This is absolutely
one
not
of the
how you got
reasons why. Well, to be honest, Aaron, I don't think you've read any books, philosophical books written by these classical Islamic scholars on the
there. Okay,
proofs
we're
for
done.
Islam, because
right.
one of
I'm out. Thank you. We'll have
Okay.
another conversation another
Okay,
time.
good having you on, Aaron,
I
and it was a
appreciate
good
actually
talk.
I quite enjoyed the discussion and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Take care. All the best. So yeah, so I think that was good. I think we made some progress, although there was a bit of backpedaling towards the end there. But I think we made some progress because I think the entailment of what he said towards the end of it could be necessary, but then it could have not existed altogether. Well, if it could have not existed altogether and an absolute philosophical nothingness was real, then magic, right? So then it popped into existence out of nothing. The fact that something exists indicates that there is something that is ontologically necessary and also metaphysically necessary. So I think that last bit there is a bit problematic. That how he's appealing to a philosophical nothingness that could have been the case, and that the energy and matter could have been possible, but it might have not existed altogether.
Abdul, listen, we have to be clear. The guy came on here, and towards the end, when I was asking him questions and kind of pressing him on it, he literally said that it's impossible for there to be nothing. Therefore, he is positing some sort of necessity about the nature of reality. Something that exists has to be necessary because it's logically impossible for there to be absolutely nothing. Now, when I explained the implications of that, he realizing that he is positing a necessary being, he kind of flip-flopped. At the same time, he said, well, Sean Carroll says it's possible that there is nothing, and that but he even within that statement, he said, I disagree with Sean. So again, still affirming that there is something that is necessary, because the opposite of that, which would be that there's absolutely nothing, he said is impossible.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a good discussion because he
went back on it.
I think Sharif took him down the line of reasoning, and I think I appreciate the fact that he actually listened and he agreed on many of the points. I think it's just the logical entailment of that, and or the outcome of whatever he agreed upon that he wasn't very comfortable with, and yeah, I think there's a problem with again undermining philosophy, and this happens a lot of times with some internet atheists and even theists. The idea that philosophy is good, but come on, give me the science, give me the meat and potatoes of the discussion. And then through their line of reasoning, and when trying to explain their position and reason their way with through the discussion with their interlocutor, you see that they're using a lot of philosophy that is actually misplaced and faulty. It just shows the importance of philosophy. And if you're going to undermine philosophy in this way, you're kind of undermining science altogether, because the philosophical underpinnings upon which science is based need to be reliable in order for science to be reliable. If the foundation is not reliable, then the whole building collapses. So I think there's this problem that you often see with internet atheists that forget the philosophy, give me the actual evidence, not realizing that their position on, their conceptualization of what evidence is and what it means to provide a justification for a belief is a philosophical position. Their views on science and how it's reliable is a philosophical position. Their views on God and all of that stuff is a philosophical position, but at the same time, you kind of want to, sweep the philosophy under the carpet and talk science, not realizing that you're just going to be talking philosophy without knowing anything about it. So I think that's one of the main problems here, and that was one of the main barriers to the discussion. But we got somewhere, and I think we answered the question of the stream, which is something that I didn't think would happen. I think I was telling you guys that I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm happy.
I knew it was going to happen.
I'm happy it actually.
I think what it is that, look, firstly, I appreciate Aron Ra from coming on. Yeah, obviously it's not easy for somebody to come on onto a Muslim channel to discuss with free Muslims, theists, on this particular subject matter. Yeah, so appreciate him coming on. But, and this is the issue, is people come on, a lot of atheists come on, in my experience, very, bullish. We disagree. There is no evidence. There's none of this. Where's your evidence? There's no proof of the existence of the creator, etc., or necessary being. Yeah. However, when you start to go and you start to demonstrate the very steps of the argument, it's entailing this discussion. It's entailing the conclusion of a necessary being, and I think that's what I thought was quite clear and evident. The point at the end was simply to say that if you agree that we have contingent realities are things which could have been another way. So even if you want to say that energy and matter could have been another way, it doesn't have to be necessary, then by definition it's a contingent reality, and by definition we would have to look for an explanation outside of itself. Now, if he's going to, or anybody is going to turn around and say, well, maybe something exists, it came into being, it had its particular properties, but there's no explanation for it. That is appealing to magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the point. That's the reason why I asked that question about, for the audience who are listening, that's the reason why I asked the question about magic, because magic, a lot of atheists are like dismissive of supernatural magic, all these types of things, leprechauns or whatever it is, but then would accept this idea that something contingent being can exist as a brute fact or come into being for no reason or no explanation or no cause whatsoever. And that's problematic. That means that he's left with two possibilities, really. Either contingent beings are explained by other external contingent beings, or ultimately there has to be a necessary foundation or necessary being that is a foundation for all contingent beings, And I think there was actually two arguments. Abdul gave one argument, and Jake sort of implied another, a third argument, a second argument. Maybe just to explain really quickly, and maybe Abdul could confirm. Abdul's argument is that, in essence, Abdul Rahman's argument, in essence, is that if all contingent beings exist, then they all require an explanation outside of itself. So even if they exist infinitely, or there's an infinite number of contingent beings, you'd still need an explanation outside of itself. And that explanation would either be another contingent being, but it would be in that same bracket as all contingent beings. Therefore, it would need another explanation, which would be a necessary being. So it's not within that bucket of all contingent beings. So that was one argument.
It's a purely logical exercise, and it doesn't depend on the idea of whether there's an infinite regress or not. I mean, there could be an infinite number of contingent things, but the same thing applies. Does the set of all contingent things have an explanation beyond itself? And you can apply a strong or weak PSR here. Proust uses a weak PSR to come to the conclusion that a necessary personal being actually exists. I mean, we didn't talk about the personal aspect here, but the infinite regress part and the infinity doesn't have to be part of the equation. You can logically conclude from the fact that the set of all contingent things requires an explanation external to itself, that explanation must be necessary, because by definition it is not part of the set it attempts to explain.
But I also wanted to raise another point, which is the point that Jake mentioned, because Jake said, look, in essence, you could have, even if you want to go down his route, which was to talk about an infinite regress, and I even asked him the question as well, do you believe in the possibility of an infinite regress? Because I believe it's a logical impossibility and a logical incoherency. And what did he say? He said, well, it's possible, you know, it's a plausible thing. So it's really interesting, because if you think about it this way, he's saying that it's possible, even though science can never ascertain it, its possibility. Science is about the quantifiable. And he's saying that you can come to a possibility of something that's non-quantifiable that science would never be able to establish. At the beginning of the stream, he said a possibility is that which science demonstrates that it's possible in its existence. Yeah.
Yep.
So he's contradicting himself by affirming an infinite regress, because science can never affirm the possibility of an infinite regress ever, because it's unquantifiable. And therefore, in the definition of science, it would be impossible. So he would, if he's using the same epistemic basis, he would have to deny an infinite regress, which then means that the only logical entailment he has of his observations is that contingent beings require a necessary being, a necessary foundation, something that has to exist, that's eternal, that has no explanation outside of itself, and that is the cause and the explanation for all possible contingent beings.
Yeah, there's something else I wanted to mention as well, because a lot of times, and I've seen this again with a lot of internet atheists, that the idea that, listen,
it might sound a little bit derogatory calling him an internet atheist.
No, I'm not calling Aron an internet atheist. I'm talking generally about my experience with some internet atheists. I mean, I'm not trying to generalize. Some are very philosophically equipped. So this idea that, you're talking about a necessary being, or even if you're going to specify like a conscious cause of all contingent things, but you're not talking about God who cares about morality or is all loving and stuff like that. And this is a problem. It's almost like you don't want to take our position seriously. If you're asking somebody why they believe in something, you have to follow them in their line of reasoning and not try to jump around and ask them, with red herrings, and ask them to prove something that is completely unrelated to the line of reasoning they're trying to drive you through. Now, the idea here is that, like, for example, if I want to prove that, if someone wants to make an argument for, Abdul's existence. So let's say Abdul was walking down the street. Now they're going to describe certain properties of me, right? So maybe they'll talk about my hair, my height, whatever, right? They don't have to describe every single property about me in order to kind of infer or provide evidence for the idea that I, pass by the road. And in the same sense, if I'm going to provide you with evidence for the existence of God, you can't lump all the properties of, the God of Abraham as per scripture together and tell me, no, your evidence isn't evidence unless you provide evidence for all of these attributes at one go. That's completely unreasonable. I mean, I don't know what methodology this would actually work in. Like what can you prove using this methodology? You'd have to basically know everything about an inference or a hypothesis in order to infer it in the first place. You'd never get off the ground in making inferences about stuff, because you have to have kind of indicators first, right? So this is my line of reasoning that brings me to this particular conception, and build upon that. Look at the inferences that you can make from that. And there are other lines of reasoning you can use to infer different things about the same idea. So this idea, it seems like, you have to provide an argument for everything about God in order for that to be an argument about God. That's just completely ridiculous in my view. I mean, I'm not talking about specifically Aron here. I'm talking about the idea.
Yeah. And I think there's another point that I think I just wanted to address. I never really got to address it right at the end because Aron had to go. I can't pronounce his name. He said it's not Aron. It's
Aron. Yeah, I've been practicing. Aron.
Aron.
I think it's Aron. Yeah. I'd say Aaron, but I don't know.
Yeah, we say Aron. Aron.
Yeah.
Anyway, Aron. Yeah. Right at the end, he goes, "Oh, this is not going to lead you to the Islam or the Islamic conception of God or Islam." Yeah. And what I wanted to say at the end was, our scholars of Islam, they spoke about this 1,000 years ago. Yeah. So Imam al-Juwayni, he wrote a book called Al-Irshad Ibn Hazm al-Fisal, he talks about this evidence. Imam Ghazali, Ihya Ulumuddin, he has 3 different evidences for the existence of God. One of them is the contingent beings. So this is not like something which is absent from the Islamic conception. In fact, they lead the discussion by saying that one of the reasons for the proofs for Islam, or one of the explanations that Islam is more likely to be true, amongst loads of others, but one of them is that the Islamic conception of God fits with our rational conception of a necessary being, which has a will and intelligence. We didn't really get on to discuss those 2 aspects of it. So, it's really important. But, and I think this is where I always get a little bit, and I think Jake pointed it out earlier, although he's dropped off the stream, which is that whenever you walk people to this conclusion of a necessary being, they realize the consequence, and then suddenly, it's like, no,
Backtrack.
I just don't. Yeah, backtrack. No, I don't want to. Yeah, and it's like, come on, man. Tell me what argument within what we discussed did not lead to that necessary conclusion of a necessary being. Yeah, and if you can't explain that, then I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to do more thinking on this.
And I mean that's the problem, that backpedaling towards the end. It's the idea that, okay, these are the consequences of what I've committed to, or sometimes generally that happens, that someone comes to a realization that certain belief he holds, leads to certain consequences. So there's a bit of like, intellectual tension there going on, and that's fine. You just need to adjust your views. So if you want to suddenly accept magic, then you can go for it. I mean, it's not a problem. So yeah, and I think the problem also is what he was saying about this is not how you've come to believe in God, and I think that's problematic, and I didn't really like that, because you can kind of like psychoanalyze anybody. I can tell you, Aaron, that's everything you're saying about evidence and science is not why you disbelieve in God. You disbelieve in God because you want to disbelieve in God. You want to do whatever you want to do. You just you're emotionally troubled from the idea of God. You had a troubled childhood with religion or whatever. That's an easy game to play, and 2 can play that game really. But the idea is that what you want to do is you want to be charitable towards your interlocutor's views, right? And many of us growing up, especially over the past 20 years or so in the West, have gone through phases of doubt and agnosticism, even closet agnosticism, that I've personally been through. And through many of these arguments, we've actually come to the conclusion that a necessary being exists, and from there God exists. Now the problem here is that you're going to say that no, there's an emotional aspect, you want to believe in whatnot. Well, I can say that about you too. There's an emotional aspect, and there's cognitive dissonance, and you want to disbelieve in God too. So it's better to put these games aside and try to be charitable to each other's views, and assume that your interlocutor actually has a well thought out theory about things, and try to deconstruct it. That's what we were trying to do with Aaron. That's why we were asking him many questions about his epistemology and how he comes to know things, because we know that generally the most common sense and rational answers to these questions lead to this conclusion of a necessary being. Of course, you can disagree, but then again, the idea is to be charitable to your interlocutor's view and not just assume that they've just been emotionally manipulated into their beliefs.
Yeah. I don't know if Jake wants to say anything. I know he's off. He hasn't got his video on, but
No, I'm here. I just kind of want to give my recap of what I think happened in the conversation. From what I can tell, Aron, I think it was a good conversation. We got more out of it than I thought we would have anyway, because the stream was, does a necessary being exist? I felt towards the end there, Sharif, you did most of the legwork, but I felt towards the end there when I was sort of giving Aron the different options and looking at what he actually said, he literally said that it's impossible for there to be nothing. So there had to be something, which means he's saying that there is something that is necessary and eternal. Now, of course, we as Muslims believe that this is God, this is Allah, but we didn't get into that further conversation about what sort of properties this being must possess. We could have went into things like this being must possess a will, and use sort of Imam Ghazali's argument of explaining how that is. We didn't get to that part, but I think we did make a lot of cover a lot of ground, in him, on the one hand, by his own words, seeming to admit that there is a necessary being, but then when we actually put that into words and tried to say what the implications of what he said is, he sort of backtracked to something else. And so I thought that was really interesting. I think it was a good discussion. If he's willing to come back to have a further discussion of, first of all, solidifying that there is a necessary being, that would be great. And then second, to analyze what the properties of this necessary being must be. I think we could have a second, part 2 discussion on that, and that would be very good.
Well, what I find really interesting is that Aron Ra's been around for a while, and he talks to a lot of theists, but he seems to be, I don't want to be critical of him because he came onto our show, but he seems to be quite ignorant, on some of these basic points about what a contingent being is, what a necessary being is. He even, conflated the idea of being with personhood. As though they're the
Sharif,
same thing.
sorry to cut you, but I wanted to actually make that point because I saw in the chat somewhere that somebody said that they thought we should have clarified what a being was, and that a being just meant a thing or an existent thing. But I don't know if the person knew this part, but Sharif actually clarified that, and he explicitly stated that, because when Aron thought, as we knew, and we thought that it would happen, and even other atheists who heard about it, they thought he was going to think that a being is some kind of conscious thing. And we're saying, no, we're not saying that. A being, in terms of philosophy, and Sharif pointed this out, is simply just anything that exists. It's literally just a thing.
Yeah.
So I do want to point out that I think we did make that clear. Now,
he agreed to it as well. He accepted that point,
Yeah, and I think Aron agreed to it as well, because I did want to point that out. Maybe the person who commented didn't see that part, but that is something really important, and that's why even towards the end, it's like he accepted it, but then at the end when I said, oh, so Aron, you do believe in a necessary being, but then he was like, well, no, I don't. It seemed like he was going back to assuming that being meant something like God or
you know what, Jay?
consciousness.
I think I honestly think, Jay, I think what it is, and this is all with all due respect to Aron, is I don't think he wants to be seen as conceding on the point of a necessary being, because that's a pretty big concession that he's making. And I think if he did accept, and he said, yeah, okay, I accept a necessary being in the context of a necessary thing or a necessary foundation to reality, I think that's a big concession. And I think it was just something that he didn't want to concede.
But Sharif and Jake, I mean, I don't know about you, but I find it very surprising. Like, again, no disrespect to Aron. I think we've had a very good discussion, and I think he was respectful, and I honestly enjoyed the discussion with him. But it's just surprising that an atheist who is so popular and who is advocating for atheism and for the scientific method and enlightenment and intellectual discourse, and in the topic of philosophy and theology, doesn't know what the term necessary being means, and he's been around for quite a long time. So I don't get how this works. I mean, how do you become such a big figure in the atheist community with such a respected voice without knowing such a basic term about the worldview your entire life revolves around critiquing? I mean, I don't get it. I honestly, it's just strange to me, because this is not something difficult. You can just Google necessary being, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and just look at what it means. I mean, it doesn't take much time, and it's a very basic term So I don't know. It's just strange.
Maybe what it is, Abdul, is that some people, they don't like to talk about these. They think they dismiss philosophy. Yeah, it's all like, crazy, weird, non-practical
exactly.
theorizing. But the problem is, and this is the problem, is he was using philosophy throughout all of his justifications for evidence.
Of course.
And then obviously we even got to the point where he agreed that empiricism on its own is not sufficient. You need empiricism and logical axioms in order to come to certain conclusions within science. You can't just have empiricism. So you need to have things like the law of non-contradiction or the principle of sufficient reason in order to make sense of data or of interpret observation.
Right.
Someone in the chat. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Sharif, when Abdul was questioning him in the beginning about, evidence and his standards of evidence and his epistemology, he didn't see, like, at one point when you came in, Sharif, you're like, well, this is a philosophical question, it's not a scientific one. And he was at the beginning, he was opposed to that. And then when you kind of repeated the point 2 or 3 times, he accepted that, well, yeah, it is a philosophical one.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
He did concede to several things throughout the discussion. And I think what people need to see, whether it be atheist, Muslim, or whatever, is maybe some of these finer points could have gone over people's head if they weren't paying attention. I suggest that people go back and listen to and watch the stream again after we close this out, and really pay attention to what happens in the conversation from beginning to end, and maybe even take notes on it, because there were very important concessions throughout the conversation, all the way up until the point of him saying that it's impossible for there to be absolutely nothing, which entails that, well, then there has to be something that is necessary, because nothing isn't necessary. So it has to be something that's necessary. But then when we pointed that out, he kind of went back on it. And I agree with your assessment of Sharif. I think it's because the actual question of the conversation was, is there a necessary being? When he sort of realized that he was admitting that there is a necessary being, he didn't want to explicitly state that because it wouldn't really look good. So I'm hoping that nevertheless that he would be willing to come back on for a part 2 to solidify that point, for him to openly admit that there is a necessary being. And then once he does that, then we can further the conversation as to the properties of this necessary being is and has to be. And upon analysis, we would argue that it cannot actually be matter and energy, because matter and energy are contingent things rather than necessary things. And we would argue that it has to be something like God.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to go soon, but I think it was a good conversation. I think definitely it'd be good to have a second conversation regards to what he was saying. If we continue. But one thing I think is really important is Aaron has very negative views about Islam and about probably generally Muslims, because Muslims adhere to Islam. Yeah, he probably thinks we're irrational. He probably thinks we don't have any good reasons or good explanations or whatever it is. Yeah, but he generally has quite negative views about Islam. What I suggest, whether it's people like Aaron or others who may have these negative views, is engage with us, engage with Muslims sincerely, and try to understand it from their perspective. Try to understand, even if you disagree, try to understand and engage with people so that you could try to understand from their perspective why they believe and why they accept certain premises and certain ideas. And I think if he did that, rather than, I think what he does at the moment is he reads the Quran and then he puts his sound bites in there, really tries to engage in the tradition to understand it, or amongst the Muslims to understand why they believe what they believe. I think he would appreciate better his own position. And secondly, I think he would start to appreciate that actually there are good reasons as to why Muslims accept the positions that they accept, to the point where he's actually almost becoming somebody who believes in a necessary eternal thing anyway, a necessary being.
Yeah, and I do want to just sort of emphasize what you guys said earlier about, I mean, let me just be quite frank when I say this, is that Aron, on many of the key things, like he defined a mind as necessarily being dependent on a biological structure. And then
By
when he
definition,
went to, yeah, and then when he went, I don't think he really understood what by definition meant. But because then when he went to by definition and read what mind, the definition of mind was on Google, even reading it, I'm saying, oh, I agree with that. And he's saying, you see that by definition, mind necessitates being, yeah. And I said, which part of that definition means that it is dependent upon a biological structure? And he said, a person. Well, I mean, the definition of personhood, and my Trinitarian friends might enjoy this, the definition of a person is widely disputed. There's many different definitions of it, many of which don't depend on anything whatsoever to do with the biological structure. So, which I said that to him, and he sort of also conceded that point. My point of bringing up these numerous different examples is that Aron, for being a popular atheist on YouTube and having all these hundreds of thousands of subscribers and followers, is extremely philosophically naive. And I don't mean that with disrespect, but I think it's the reality of the case, and he may even admit that himself. But I think that was demonstrated time and time again throughout the conversation.
Yeah, and Jake, he made that
almost
point.
tried to.
He made that point about personhood to you of all people. I mean, I was kind of laughing there, but because someone brought this up in the chat after I said that, you know, I was surprised about how philosophically naive he was on certain matters. He was saying that Aron is known because of his knowledge in evolution, not of his knowledge in philosophy. But that's a problem for two reasons. First of all, he always makes the argument or requests from the theists to provide evidence for the existence of God, because he, having surveyed the evidence, has found no reason or no evidence for the belief in God. So that's a philosophical claim, and he's already engaging, and he's been engaging for years in these philosophical discussions about the existence of God aside from evolution. Also, with regard to evolution, what Jake just said about personhood and the brain and the mind, well, someone who is well known and for being, you know, well versed in evolution should be aware of these things like the mind body problem and how they do, you know, pose problems to a physicalist account of the mind. So I mean, that's a huge point. Yeah,
Abdul, even if you read a simple introductory text to philosophy of mind, you will realize that nobody makes the claim that mind by definition necessitates a biological structure. Now, people may take that position and do what's called the identity theory and equate mind and brain. Yes, there are people that take that position, but they argue it out philosophically and scientifically. They don't argue it by definition in the same way that a triangle has three sides, as Sharif said. No philosopher no academic in that field would take that argument seriously, that mind is by definition a biological structure or dependent upon a biological structure. They may make the argument that at the end of the day that it is, but not by definition, by either philosophical or scientific argumentation or a combination of the two.
And it has to be a combination of the two, obviously, because scientifically you can't really observe the mind from a third person perspective, so you have to make certain philosophical leaps in order to come to that conclusion. But this is the problem I was trying to point to him, that he's coming forward with a materialist presupposition or a physicalist presupposition about he's bringing his materialist or physicalist theory of mind to the table as if it's a fact, and he's telling us that this is by definition the case, and based on this I want evidence, or we want to discuss this. And this was actually the problem with the entire discussion, or generally his approach to these discussions as a whole, that he brings these philosophical, not scientific, philosophical presuppositions to the table, almost regards them as dogma. And it's like, you want to prove anything to me, it has to be based on this criteria. And when we try to question the criteria, it's suddenly frustrating. Where's the evidence? I want the evidence based on the criteria. But then as a skeptic, you should be skeptical of the criteria you're putting forward. Isn't that the idea of being a skeptic? Shouldn't you question everything? Shouldn't you not believe things without evidence? Shouldn't you be open to critiques about your worldview? So the idea is that the reason we tried deconstructing his view in the beginning is for precisely this reason, is because we know that in these discussions, people often bring their presuppositions and assume they're set in stone and say that whatever evidence you're going to provide me, or however you're going to prove to me the validity of your position, has to be based on my philosophical presuppositions, and that's just a problem.
Yeah, and Abdul, I mean, the key thing we have to point out here, okay, is that the issue of whether or not God exists and the God question is a metaphysical or philosophical question. It is not a scientific one. So part of the reason why I, at least, and maybe you guys as well, are pointing out some of the examples that demonstrate Aron's philosophical naivete, and why I'm stressing that on that is because what the audience needs to realize is that Aron is philosophically naive, and he's coming into a discussion and has been doing so for many years about a metaphysical or philosophical question, which is whether or not God exists, where he may only know a certain degree in science, and he even admitted he doesn't really know much cosmology, so maybe only in the realm of biology and specifically evolution. But that is not going to tell you whether or not God exists. So once you establish that the God question is a metaphysical or philosophical one, and that Mr. Ra is not really philosophically equipped for that discourse, it's very important that people realize the connection between the two. And again, I'm not trying to disrespect the guy, but I think that the examples we brought up were evident. It would be like me, I'm not that knowledgeable in evolution. If I went on to his show and he started telling me about basic terms in evolutionary, the field of evolution, and I didn't know them, and I was making basic errors about what adaptation was, or all of these different things, I would expect for that also to be pointed out. So I think it's very important that people notice that this question is a philosophical one, and Aron, with all due respect, doesn't seem to be knowledgeable in the area of philosophy, and to be quite frank, doesn't even seem to care to be knowledgeable in the area. So I just wanted to point that out.
Cool. I don't know if there's
we're gonna end it now.
Abdul Rahman, I think you need to announce next week's show as well.
Oh yeah, next week it's this Sunday, right?
This Sunday, inshallah.
Yeah, this Sunday
5
we're having a show on deism, inshallah. So
refuting deism.
Yeah, inshallah. So same also, time at 6 p.m.
Inshallah, we'll be Joseph Ponders will be back, inshallah. He couldn't make it today, but inshallah we'll be back. But make sure also for the audience to like, share, subscribe. Helps us with our content. Helps us, supports us in getting the message out there as best as possible, inshallah.
And if you give me 1 second, because I'm just about to get to my computer. If you want to make any final statements, Abdul, before I play the outro, and then we can end.
Yeah. Well,
sure. I think overall, we can just say that. Go ahead.
I was going to say Jake's Muslim metaphysician to subscribe to that Pondering Soul. People should subscribe to him as well. Sorry, Abdul, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Yeah, just to sum it up, while Jake returns to his computer, I think overall it was a good discussion. We're kind of critiquing Aron Ra for a while there, but the positive side is that he engaged very well. He was responsive to our points. He was very civil in his approach. He wasn't argumentative most of the time, so I appreciate that about him. I appreciate him coming on, and I hope we can have another discussion with him, or another number of discussions with him, because this was really great and we got somewhere. So yeah,
I hope he realizes. I really hope he realizes the level of this discussion for himself. How it would be beneficial for him, though. I'm not sure how much you would realize that. This isn't about ego and about, who's going to be, who's going to defeat the other person. It's not, gladiatorial combat here. It's about trying to understand people's worldviews and try to appreciate their arguments, their evidences that they bring forward. And I hope he understands that, because even if he wants to still maintain atheism, he'll be a better atheist for it, because he will understand the arguments.
Exactly.
Yeah? At the moment, with a lot of internet YouTube atheists, is that they come across as very angry, very emotional, very antagonistic towards religion and believers, making very much top line, sloganistic statements. Yeah, you need to make it better, the discourse. Yeah, and I hope he appreciates that.
Just a very important point there. Just the last thing I'm going to say is that's a very good point. I mean, it's going to make your atheism stronger. Like, if your worldview depends on the critique of another worldview, which atheism does depend and largely depend on a critique of theism, then it really makes your atheism stronger to critique the strongest form of theism, not to focus on matters like, hey, why does God care about you cutting off whatever, right? I mean, that's not really the strongest argument. That's not really the strongest argument for theism, believe it or not. So if that's going to be, if you're just attacking a caricature of theism and you're basing your atheism on almost a straw man of theism, then that doesn't make your atheism very strong. There are philosophical atheists out there who base their atheism on the strongest representation of theism, and I think that's what a lot of people need to do, and that's what a lot of people really don't understand. They think that undermining the other position, or attacking the weakest form of the other person's position, actually kind of like gives you the advantage. I think on the contrary, it makes you look weaker. What I personally want to do, and I think generally what we want to do here, is when we're discussing whether it's atheism, Christianity, other religions, or whatnot, we want to critique the strongest form or the strongest representation of these worldviews, and we want to critique them based on what they say about themselves, not what we think about them, and not just based on what the layman atheist says about atheism, based on what top philosophers within atheist academia has to say about atheism, based on the strongest cases for naturalism. That's what we want to critique, because if we critique a weaker form, that just makes us look weaker. And I think internet atheists should be thinking in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. Sharif, you have anything to add before I end it?
No, man. I think we've said all we need to say, inshallah.
All right, inshallah. That being said, guys, appreciate you all for watching. Do consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video, as well as the other videos on our channel. And we'll see you on Sunday, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.